In part 1 of this video, we talked about the 6 ways that we tend to get psychologically stuck or inflexible, according to ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. Now we're going to dive into the 6 key processes for building psychological flexibility, aka how we get unstuck. Okay, now let's dive into those 6 processes that are designed to help us get unstuck. First, we have, drumroll, acceptance. As the name implies, acceptance is a very core component of acceptance and commitment therapy. Shocking, I know. If you know anyone in AA or any 12-step groups, you've probably heard the serenity prayer, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's what the acceptance is all about, right? Recognizing and acknowledging the things that you cannot control, that you have no influence over, and allowing them to be there. And accepting something doesn't mean that you like it or you want it, right? Like, to go back to the example of fear, who likes feeling fear, right? It's not a fun, enjoyable emotion, but you don't really get to choose your emotions. So accepting it just means making space for it, acknowledging that it's there, and letting it be there without fighting it. And the truth is, there's a lot of stuff that we really can't control in life that we do need to practice acceptance around. For example, we can't control other people. So you might have to accept that you have no control over what other people say, feel, think, do, their opinions of you, any of that. You also can't control what thoughts pop into your brain, like we just talked about with the purple elephant, right? So accepting that thoughts are going to come and go on their own. Same thing with feelings. Same thing with the future. You can't predict the future. You don't know what's going to happen to yourself or to anyone else. So accepting that you cannot control for that. And the reason we practice acceptance isn't, again, because we actually are happy that bad things are happening or happy with the emotions that we're feeling. It's because we can't control them. So accepting is kind of the most intelligent response to have to something that you have no control over, because otherwise you're just going to drive yourself crazy trying to control something you can't control. And then the next process is that cognitive defusion. Remember how we get fused to our thoughts when we treat them as facts, so we get really stuck in them? Cognitive defusion is the way out of that pattern. You're basically learning how to see your thoughts as just thoughts, just random words in your brain. Sometimes helpful, sometimes not helpful, sometimes relevant, sometimes irrelevant. But really, thoughts are just words in your brain, and they only have meaning if you decide that they have meaning. One quick and easy way to practice cognitive defusion is to take a thought that's bothering you. For example, I'm a loser or nobody likes me, and introduce it to yourself by labeling it as a thought. So my brain is telling me I'm a loser, or I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. Just by adding in that little introductory statement, you're reminding yourself and you're reminding your mind that this is just a thought. This is not truth with a capital T. The third way to build psychological flexibility is through being present. That means ongoing, non-judgmental contact with both your inner world, so thoughts, feelings, memories, physical sensations, and your outer world, so what's going on all around you. When you're stuck in that conceptualized past and future, you're not allowing things to be different in your current reality. If the dominance of conceptualized past is your brain telling you the story of, I always have a terrible time at dinner parties, then you're going to go to the dinner party and assume that you're having a terrible time. But if you're being present, you might discover maybe some moments are terrible, but other moments are kind of pleasant and other ones are neutral, right? So making contact with the present moment without judgment and with curiosity allows you to discover what's actually true instead of assuming what's true based on past experience or just based on stories and judgments that your mind is giving you. A similar process is self as context, which is basically just another way of saying the observing self. When you're stuck in attachment to the conceptualized self, you're so stuck in the labels that you've either given yourself or other people have given you that there's no wiggle room for anything to be different. If your whole life you've been told that you're a bad dancer, I have a personal tie to this one, then you're going to get so attached to that label of yourself that it affects your behavior. You're going to avoid dancing. You're going to be embarrassed when you're tearing up the dance floor. You're basically going to feed into this belief in this story that you've become so attached to that it feels like something that defines you, rather than allowing for things to ever change or be different, or even just be less meaningful and less important. Like, yeah, maybe I am a bad dancer, but if that doesn't really mean that much to me, then it's just like not an important aspect of my identity, and I can go on living my life without really being too attached to it and without it really affecting me. Remember how we were talking about how when you're so engaged in these patterns of avoidance and control, you end up moving away from your values and not really paying attention to the stuff that's meaningful to you? So the antidote to that is values clarification. Basically figuring out for yourself, what matters to me? What do I want to stand for? What principles do I want to guide my life? You can think of values like roads on the roadmap of your life, right? So there's no such thing as achieving your values, right? Because like if I value honesty, I could be honest one time, but it's not like I'm done because my life goes on and I'm presented with new opportunities to either be honest or dishonest. So it's important to think of values as directions that move you towards the life you want to live. And sometimes you get off track, and that's okay. You just kind of remind yourself to get back on track and, practice the things that matter to you again. One easy way to get in touch with what your values are is to ask yourself, what makes me feel proud of myself? What type of person do I want to be so that when I look back on my life, I feel good about who I was and how I behaved? And the answers to those questions are probably going to point you toward what your values are. Remember, nobody else gets to define your values for you. They are subjective. So it's not the things that would make your parents proud or what would make your friends like you more. It's the things that you deep down care about and that matter to you. And then lastly, we have a process called committed action, which is basically what it sounds like. And that's the commitment part of acceptance and commitment therapy. When we're suffering, when we're stuck, we're not striving towards our values. We're not setting goals that align with the type of person we want to be because we're so focused on just getting rid of our pain. But when we're engaging in committed action, we are building habits and patterns of behavior that align with our values and match being the type of person we want to be, even if we aren't always feeling happy inside, even if we are feeling sometimes in pain or uncomfortable. Okay, it's important that we think of these 6 processes as interconnected. So they're not steps that you work through in any particular order. They're 6 interconnected processes that all kind of work together in tandem to help you build that psychological flexibility that we're talking about. Remember that the goal of ACT is not to feel better. The goal of ACT is to build psychological flexibility. Psychological flexibility is our ability to stay present, to treat every experience as a new experience, instead of making assumptions or jumping to conclusions based on the past or the future, or making assumptions based on the stories that our brains are telling us. And then that allows us to respond to that specific situation or that specific moment in an appropriate way that aligns with our values and that helps us be the type of person we want to be. So let's say I know deep down, I want to get married one day. I want to have a partner and a family, and that's really important to me. And then I go out and I meet this great guy and we really hit it off and he asks me on a date, but I start to get those old familiar fear feelings. And then my brain gives me its whole usual song and dance of, you're a loser, you're too afraid, you're not going to be able to go out with him, you're going to screw it up, you're not going to be able to handle this. If I'm demonstrating psychological inflexibility, I'm going to believe my brain automatically. I'll probably say no to the date, and then I'll sit at home feeling sorry for myself. Or maybe I'll go, but I'll use the tequila strategy, drink too much, and make a fool out of myself. On the flip side, if I'm demonstrating psychological flexibility, I'll notice the fear as it arises. I'll acknowledge it without trying to get rid of it. I might say to myself, like, okay, there's fear going on. There's nothing for me to do about it because feelings just come and go naturally on their own and I can't control them, and that is okay. Then I might respond to the story from my brain about being a loser who can't handle this, and I might say, this is a story my brain is telling me. It's not necessarily true. I can still go on this date because it's important to me to make new connections and I really do want to find a partner. Just because it's been uncomfortable and unpleasant in the past doesn't mean it's going to be uncomfortable or unpleasant this time. I'm going to go on the date and maybe I'll surprise myself and have a nice time, but I won't know until I go see what happens. Remember, if you want a deeper dive into each of these 6 processes, subscribe to the channel and you'll get those videos. So obviously I think ACT is great, but it's not just my opinion. There is a lot of research showing that ACT is effective for treating a whole variety of conditions. Studies have shown ACT to be effective for treating everything from chronic pain to dealing with a chronic health diagnosis to everything like depression, anxiety, OCD, substance abuse, binge eating, body image, burnout, relationship problems, insomnia, perfectionism, and so much more. Some of the strongest evidence out there is for using ACT to treat chronic pain. What I think is the coolest thing ever is that the pain itself does not change. So like, let's say someone has a chronic pain condition and they're rating their pain on a scale of 1 to 10 and they rate it as a 10 before they use ACT. Once they learn and implement these 6 processes of ACT, their pain may be exactly the same, but instead of rating it as a 10 out of 10, they only rate it as a 5 or a 6 out of 10. So the pain itself hasn't changed, but their relationship to it has changed to make it subjectively less painful, which I totally geek out over and I think is so interesting and cool. And the same thing can be true not just for physical pain, but for emotional distress. So for something like depression, maybe you feel a really, really intense sense of hopelessness. If you practice ACT, the intensity of your hopelessness may decrease and become less intense, even if it's still there. So it just goes to show us that it's not just our reality, it's our perception of our reality that matters. In case you can't tell, I love ACT. And I know it's kind of abstract and it's definitely not for everyone. But one of the reasons I love it so much is that when I was in graduate school and I was learning a bunch of different psychological theories, ACT was the first one that really clicked for me, where when I learned it and I applied it to my own lifelong anxiety and perfectionism, it just made sense. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is working. Before I learned ACT, I hadn't realized just how much I was making my anxiety so much worse by trying to get rid of it, trying to control it, trying to seem like I was just so chill and all that. A lot of other approaches to mental health, like CBT and other theories like that, will tell you to change your thoughts or to challenge your thoughts and recognize that they're not helping you and they're not rational and basically not logical. And that might help some people, but that never helped me because I was always like, yeah, I know my thoughts aren't rational. I know they're not logical, but they're still there and they're still bothering me. And that's why ACT is so effective, because it's not about convincing yourself or convincing someone else that what you're feeling or thinking isn't helping you or isn't logical. It's about just recognizing that like these things are part of the human experience and they're going to come and go naturally, and you don't need to waste your energy trying to control them or change them. So remember, thoughts and feelings are not problems to be solved. They're just natural parts of being alive. Some thoughts and feelings are obviously more enjoyable than others, but we don't really get to pick and choose what pops into our brains and bodies, right? It's not like we're looking on a menu and saying, I want to feel this and that, and I don't want to feel those other things. That's just not how it works. If that was how it worked, everyone would just choose to be calm and happy all of the time. No one would ever choose sadness or insecurity or shame. Those are not enjoyable feelings, but they're natural parts of being alive. And when we stop fighting them and we allow them to just be there and do their thing, they don't have to have such a strong effect over us. I have seen ACT change so many people's lives. It has changed my life too, and I think it can change yours as well. If you learned something from this video, I want to know. So drop a comment, let me know your biggest takeaway, and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos on ACT.